From the alleged incident at a Spruill Avenue convenience store last week to the latest with the Maryville Ashleyville development to the 2-year anniversary of the Mother Emanuel tragedy, Muhiyyidin D speaks exclusively to me for the special edition of Quintin School Subs. Muhiyyidin.
Yeah, brother, how you doing?
Good to see you as always.
Always.
I appreciate it. The last time I saw you was, I guess, 2 months ago.
Yes.
And you were involved with a situation down on George Street.
Indeed.
But here we are now with another situation which involves a 12-year-old kid allegedly being kicked by a store worker at a Spruill Avenue, a convenience store in North Charleston. And apparently this guy, Maryville, 19 years old, a Ranger Drive in North Charleston, was charged with third-degree assault and battery after video surfaced of him allegedly kicking a 12-year-old kid who wanted to look for ball peanuts. But apparently the store clerk didn't understand his language. When you look back to that incident on Friday night to right now, what still plays in your mind?
How little we do to protect our children. This is a very similar conversation that we had after the North Charleston school bus incident, in which the police officer came on the bus, grabbed, assaulted our children, threw our children off the bus, threw other children on the ground. This child abuse. How little we think of our children to show up and to protect them. I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. And then the second thing that comes to mind is how the children themselves, are willing and ready to defend their dignity and their humanity against store operators, police officers, teachers, people that are dehumanizing them, people that are treating them less than human. And how they feel like they're out there on their own, and they're getting punished for standing up for themselves. Adults have more responsibility, according to the law, than children do. But for some reason we enter these kinds of conversations asking about the behavior of the children and if that behavior warranted adults putting their hands upon children. That is just very concerning that we're still having that kind of a conversation. And I don't think that other communities would be engaging in that kind of conversation if something like that happened to their children. I think there would be full-on onslaught of lawsuits and boycotts. In this particular location, there's a store that's right in front of the Uncle Sam Mart, and that store could easily be opened up by someone that lives in that neighborhood, so we can completely drown out the business that we're giving to them. But my most urgent concern is how little we react to showing up to support and to defend our children. And I think they see that, and I think that's very concerning. And I think that if they don't see that kind of defense coming from their family and their community, that they'll have no reason to find refuge in the adults, and they'll have very little respect for our guidance and our asks of them when we don't show up for them.
Where does the conversation go from here?
It's a deep conversation that has to happen at a neighborhood level. So ideally, you would think about who's the city council representative there. That's Michael Brown, Senior.
Right.
Ideally, he would be calling together the store owner and the community. Ideally, he would have the kind of connections within the community and the neighborhood associations that we can devise a plan to make sure this behavior never happens again, to make sure there are protocols for accountability so the neighborhood knows how to start a boycott, how to sustain a boycott. Possibly he's in a position to support a local business opening up in front of that store in order to ensure accountability for this kind of behavior, and changing the economics in that space that kind of drives people into stores because there's a food desert. And so potato chips and beer and pre-packaged preservative heavy, high fructose corn syrup heavy, poisonous food is being offered to our people that live within this food desert. So ideally, we would have a representative that can understand the reality that is causing these kinds of situations, and you'd be working to create a new reality, to create something that shows the dignity and the respect that you would have for family and community that live under your watchful care, and you are their trustee. And if they are hungry for real food, if they are getting boiled peanuts as the only hot food source possibly besides McDonald's for a mile radius, that might be something that you as a representative would want to deal with. So we elect people to take our concerns and to help us create the world and the environment that we think is best for our children, that we think is best for ourselves, for our community to thrive. And what we see is, again, an opportunity to see if that will happen, to see if this form of governance actually works, or if we have to create something that's a little bit more impromptu.
Okay.
We have to unite the civil rights organizations in the area to actually take on some of the work that really the city council should be doing, and the city council representatives and the neighborhood representatives and the neighborhood associations. That's who really should be doing the work. That's where you live. Those are children that play with your children. Those are people that pay you taxes and pay your salary. You work for them, for there not to be any accountability there, again, is just an indicator of where we are, and why situations like this will keep on persisting if we don't figure out how to put the correct representation in place. Meanwhile, we have a huge opportunity. Again, that store that's right in front of this Uncle Sam Mart is available for purchase. I think it wouldn't take but 5 or 6 solid business-minded folks to come together and to see the opportunity there to nourish the community with proper food and proper nutrition and things that would be a benefit to the community. Hire some youth to work there, just like really make it something that would be beneficial. So I don't see this as anything but another reason for us to practice self-determination.
And obviously, you talked about the food desert. I know that the city of North Charleston will be partnering with Piggly Wiggly, I believe, for a store right on Rivers Avenue and McMillan soon. Is that enough?
Well, it's going to be enough, but it's not for the people that have been there, It's for the people that they're anticipating coming,
Okay.
right? And so the way that gentrification works is you allow a neighborhood to become blighted. You allow a neighborhood to become undesirable, and to the point where the property taxes go down, to the point where you can buy houses really cheap, to the point where as soon as you are, when I say you, people associated with the Sunni regime, their nepotistic kind of crony networks of people that they get kickbacks from, as soon as those individuals are able to purchase some of the land and some of the businesses there, then they start working on the infrastructure. And once the infrastructure gets developed to the point where now these property taxes start going up, now we start to put things there that are going to actually add value. So the Shakur School that got rebuilt should have been rebuilt long time ago, but got rebuilt now. You see the bridge coming over Cosgrove into North Charleston being redone, infrastructure being rebuilt now. You see what's happening with the development on the port, infrastructure is being rebuilt now. Now you see a supermarket that'll be there. And it's not being built for the people that have been there. It's being built for the population that they anticipate to come, to actually lure them in now that they are securing ownership of enough of those properties by allowing it to be blighted long enough for them to really make a hustle, have the people suffer, exploit the people, rent seeking from the people, cash, title loans, liquor stores. You give the people everything that is going to depreciate and degrade their life, and you extract as much from them as possible. And when you're done getting all you can get from them, you build up and you invite some new people in that you can get more from. So that's the real estate hustle. That's the North Charleston regime that Mayor Summy has built. And again, it's unfortunate that we haven't developed the sense of accountability, and we have not elected the kinds of representatives that are willing to fight this head on, and to really educate and share with the people what is going on. So we end up celebrating progress without a sense of understanding that progress has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with our benefit in mind. It has everything to do with where these workers for Boeing are going to live, who's developing Park Circle, who's going to be developing Stromboli Corridor and Reynolds Avenue area. Those are the battlegrounds right now. And if we don't have an eye on it, and if we don't stake our claim, and if we continue to, again, be mistreated and kicked around Charleston County as they so desire, then this is the reality we live in. Whether or not we organize to do something about it is completely up to us. We have enough city council representation. We have people in government that are leaders. We have Wendell Gilliard, we have Teddy Pryor, we have Henry Darby, we have Robert Mitchell downtown. We have a Dudley Gregory. We have folks that really should be preparing the community to benefit from all the prosperity that Charleston is going through right now and receiving. To what degree that those individuals have developed not only programs, education, and structures to support individuals that have home ownership already, so they can benefit from possibly leasing that out to people that are coming in that want to make a quick buck, or they can develop the small business kinds of structures that are necessary. Charleston still doesn't have a minority business affairs office, seriously, a serious one that has a line budget that's funded. So these are the types of things that, again, you would hope that your elected officials that had your best interests in heart would be doing very diligently in order to ensure that the people that have been here benefit from the prosperity that Charleston's enjoying.
Let me stay in Charleston County, because this is the headline, really a Twitter headline from the Post and Courier. It says this: City of Charleston officials to meet with Ashleyville residents about concerns with development and gentrification. Where does your mind go to?
It's about time. It's one of those things where it's like, it's not too little too late because it's West Ashley,
Okay.
but the cost was downtown. So what it took for our representatives to develop some level of conversation and concern and ability to organize in order to support anti-gentrification efforts, it took almost losing downtown completely, and losing our home ownership, and losing our footprint, and definitely losing our economic and business footprint downtown. I can't name 10 black-owned businesses that are downtown. So I'm glad that this is happening, and I really applaud the coalition that's coming together to do this work, and I encourage them to keep on bringing together the community, but I would also ask them to hire community organizers, hire people to do community engagement. You can't just put a flyer up and do an event every now and then. You can't just make an announcement, and expect folks to show up. Community engagement, community organizing is deep work. It takes a lot of time and energy. It needs to be a job. We need to have organizers paid in every single community. If we're serious about the kind of development that we need to do, we need to have a budget. There needs to be funding going to organizers, going to youth groups that are going to do canvassing in neighborhoods to make sure everybody knows that something's going on. We can't continue to move forward and act like we're doing good works because the name of the event looks like it's going to be good and the content might actually be good as well, when we didn't do the work to make sure that the people show up, they got what they need to show up logistically. If that means a ride, that means childcare. We got to do the things that we complain that the school district doesn't do when they try to engage the community. Everybody's having meetings and talking about who's not showing up and why the people aren't there, and then talking about 50 reasons of why the people are worthless and apathetic and don't give a whatever about showing up to the meeting. But how much energy did we actually put into helping to make sure that folks understand why their self-interest is to be at this meeting, why it's important, what they would benefit from if they were there? That takes some organizing, and you devote resources to what you value. And so I have a lot of feelings around, this kind of organizing that is happening right now, and the kind of organizing that seems to be proactive, that really feels good. But when we have the same old outcome, we had a meeting and 5 residents showed up. Well, let's talk about how lazy the residents are and how ignorant they are and how they don't care about the fact that their community is changing, as if like that's a real conversation to be had. No, let's talk about how you didn't have a budget for community engagement and you didn't hire anybody to go and knock on every single door, and you didn't make sure that anybody that wanted to come had a ride, and you didn't make sure that there was childcare and food and dinner provided for the meetings. Let's talk about all of that. Let's talk about why we're not being successful, instead of blaming each other, especially blaming families that are just trying to still make ends meet and don't have time and energy and don't see the worth possibly in coming to a meeting to talk about gentrification. They're living it. What do we want to talk about? It's part of my everyday life. What do you want to talk about? Want to talk about like your idea of why it's happening? You want to talk about some solutions that you might have? That's great. I'm living it. I got a house. I need some funds so I can rebuild it and get it into a situation where I can maybe lease it out to someone that might want to come and live in it for a little while, and I'll take that money and go build another house for my family. Yeah, if you want to help me do that, that would be very, very helpful. I'll maintain my ownership of my home, my family would benefit, and it's beautiful. Can you access those capital funds? All right, you can't, then what are you talking about? So it's, the way that we engage in our conversation has to be a little more grounded and more precise in family and neighborhood-based conversations, and a little bit less about social issues that are conceptual and theoretical. Politicians can do that in the State House, because we're not holding them accountable. But we on the ground, we can't afford to develop rhetoric that doesn't really have any application to real people in real lives.
Write the headline for me, speaking of conversation. The Mother Emanuel tragedy, 2 years later. The gateway to the next chapter. It is literally being used as a platform for many groups and many organizations and many different ideologies to try to wrestle with a conversation around racial inequity,
And to make the jump from white supremacy terrorism to racial inequity was a quantum leap that I think was made because we don't shine and keep the light on the network of racists who have guns, who bomb churches, who put battle flags on the state house, who are running our cities, who have an economic stranglehold on our neighborhoods. We don't really want to talk about the fullness of the kind of economic terrorism and total warfare that has been waged against us. For some reason, we don't want to engage that. We'd rather engage a conversation around racial healing. And the way that you approach a conversation really dictates how you're going to show up in the conversation. The way that this conversation was approached was with a group of people that were very scared that another group of people were going to burn this city down. And therefore, they rushed to create a conversation around unity and healing and togetherness and harmony, which are all good things. But because the conversation was started in that kind of way, it did not allow the true reality to be analyzed, which again is white supremacy terrorism, with John C. Calhoun still standing over us and standing over Mother Emanuel. If that statue wasn't there, I would say that there would be some real understanding of the lived realities that we're enduring. That statue's there. The statue probably is not going anywhere legally for a while. But to continue to engage in a conversation that's not based upon reality, that's based upon very much so a generation of people that are 45 and older who have access to newspapers, venues, resources, their approach to the conversation, how they benefit from it politically, possibly how their church benefits from it, possibly how their nonprofit benefits from it, possibly by how their political agenda might benefit from it or their political party. They engage in a conversation with an agenda that has nothing to do with the lived reality that creates a Dylan roof, understanding now that ignorance is what creates bigotry. Ignorance is sustained by segregated schools. Ignorance is sustained by not teaching about African history within our schools. Ignorance is sustained by allowing gentrification to actually resegregate Charleston. When you have children growing up that don't know each other and that don't know anything about someone who looks different than them, you are going to create a whole nother crop of Dylan roofs, except that this crop of Dylan roofs is going to have Donald Trump as their president. And they're growing up with that reality. This is the reality. This is what we have to deal with. We have to be able to create a whole new space and a whole new conversation that is relevant to what our children are experiencing right now, instead of what's relevant to a group of people that are 45 and or above that have political advantage and political privilege, whether they're black or white or brown or green, that are engaging in a conversation very much so based upon their life experience. And their life experience, again, might have been very traumatic. Maybe they experienced having to choose between a water fountain that said white and a water fountain that said colored. Maybe they had to sit on the back of the bus. Maybe they got brutalized. So maybe they have some particular type of racial healing that they need to engage in, and they're utilizing this as a place to have that conversation for themselves and to come into some healing with maybe a group of people who they didn't get to interact with. And so now they're engaging in a conversation that honestly they should have had 30 years ago. But now they might be ready to have the conversation now that there's blood on the ground. Meanwhile, you have a whole nother generation, 2 or 3 generations. Michael Slager was 33. Dylan Roof was what, 19, 20? This is happening in a whole nother generation. The way that we're experiencing this conversation around race is different than the way that people that are 45 and above are experiencing it. Literally, the conversation needs to be centered from a whole nother generational perspective. Otherwise, the approach to the conversation is just going to keep on reifying and spinning wheels around this idea of healing for people that probably experience a lot more racial violence than my generation has experienced. What we're experiencing is coming off of a wave of mass incarceration in which our uncles and fathers and mothers and aunties were pulled away and ripped away from our families. And we were growing up in spaces in which we're experiencing a lot of pain. That pain has everything to do with the behavior and the music and the shootings and the killings that we're seeing here in Charleston. That pain has to be addressed. That's urgent. To be able to see at the same time while mass incarceration happened, affirmative action happened. So we have a huge class divide within the African community in which people that had parents that benefited from affirmative action, they grew up not understanding and feeling no engagement and unity towards people of African descent that were experiencing mass incarceration. There's 2 different realities that we're experiencing. So if we want to talk about racial anything, we have to talk about the class dynamics that are involved at this point. Maybe those class dynamics were not as present 50 years ago, but we know they were present because Burke and Avery were divided upon, based upon class lines. And so we know that these dynamics have always been there. They've just been amplified in our generation. So we have a different kind of conversation, a different approach to the conversation that we urgently need to be centered. But we can't center that conversation as long as, again, 45 older, politically savvy, got a lot of social capital, can access newspapers, access venues, blah, 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 raise money, and dominate the conversation, completely dominate the conversation, dominate the approach to the conversation to the extent that we're perpetuating trauma and we're passing on trauma, we're passing on concepts of racial identity that might not even exist anymore. We have to understand that every single generation of African people in this country have redefined themselves. Every single generation has had to redefine themselves. Why? Because we don't have a continuity of who we are. Why? Because we don't speak our language. We don't tell the stories that that's what the stories were told 1,000 years ago or even 500 years ago. We're recreating ourselves every single generation. To deal with that reality and to come to some kind of sense of self, that's Gullah Geechee. That's why I'm in Charleston, is because there are people of African descent here that do have a sense of self, that do have their own language, that do have their own culture. There's something unique there that can be uplifted and enhanced and really brought into a space of true honor and dignity if we want to have a conversation about racial healing, or what I would like to call proportional political representation, in which we don't need to integrate into whatever your blah 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 is. We got what we need and we just need this, and this is our agenda. We don't have to have a conversation about it. Here's our agenda. Are you here to support? No. Okay, cool. Well, we'll see you at the next Unity rally, you know? But we have something that needs to be protected in our culture, in our heritage, in our traditions. And that'll nurture the identity of the youth to such an extent that they'll treat each other differently because they see each other differently with a different kind of value. Those are the urgent things that we want to talk about. It's more intraracial. It's more internalized oppression that we're dealing with right now. We're not getting kicked around and being put on the back of the bus anymore. That's not our reality. I never experienced that. I'm not diminishing that, and I'm not saying that that's something that we should gloss over. What I'm saying is that's not our experience. What is my experience is that I have comrades and I have people that are growing up with me that are in jail right now for marijuana, for something that is legal in other parts of this country. Just because we live in this particular state, I have friends that are locked up right now that are away from their family. And those friends can't show up to PTA meetings because they're in jail over marijuana. That's a conversation that's very urgent to me. If we have to cast it in a racial light in order to have the conversation, I think that's ingenuine. That's not genuine. I'll cast it in a class-based conversation, because that's what's happening. There's plenty of people that have a good grip of money that happen to have a lot of melanation and be of African descent that can pay to get a lawyer to get my friend out. But my friend might not have that access to those resources, so they can't get out. Has nothing to do with the color of his skin. Has everything to do with how much money he got and how much political capital he has to move around. So the conversation has to be more precise. We're engaging in a conversation that is politically efficient for a group of people that like the idea of there being a racial healing possibility, because they can get a lot of gas off of that, versus a conversation about what lived reality is right now and what actually needs to get done in order to get people out of harm's way and to put children in situations in which they're treated with dignity wherever they live and they have access to good food. How many millions of dollars have come into the city after this massacre? How many children are still living in food deserts? What are we even talking about? We're not having a conversation about reality. We're having a conversation about people's feelings and how they can promote their brands and their political representations. We're not having a conversation about reality. That's not what's happening.
Muhiyyidin D, baha. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
It's a pleasure, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.